Hello, South by Southwest. My name is Cecilia Noel, and I'm an associate editor at Stranger's Guide. We're an award-winning publication that commissions stories from local writers and photographers to build authentic portraits of place. You can learn more about what we do at strangersguide.com, but today I'm here to introduce our distinguished speakers. Beeple is Mike Winkelmann, a graphic designer from Charleston, South Carolina, who does a variety of digital artworks, including short films, Creative Commons VJ loops, everydays, and VR AR work. Laurie Segall is the founder of ... a media company focused on onboarding the mainstream into a new era of the internet, Web3. Segall is an award-winning journalist who has interviewed the world's most influential tech leaders. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hello. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. I'm assuming you guys know his art. Yeah. Well, it's good to be here, and especially at South by Southwest after all this time. This is a kind of a cool anniversary for you, right? It was March 11th, 2021. Right, you auction off your art every day's first 5,000 days as an NFT, and it sold for 69 million?
Yeah, that was the thing.
And before that, and we don't have to rehash the whole story because your story's kind of been told. I want to get to the new stuff, but before that, you hadn't really made a lot of money on digital art?
I mean, yes and no. I had not sold my art directly because there was really no sort of like market and way for people like me to do that. And so nobody in my sort of like position as a digital artist was making money through sort of like collectors or auctions or sort of drops or anything like that. Right. And so I was making money as a sort of freelance graphic designer. Freelance graphic designer. And so, and I was getting better and better jobs throughout the sort of, years of kind of like doing this. As I kind of gained more notoriety, I would get sort of better kind of freelance gigs. So it wasn't like I was making no money, but it certainly was not.
It wasn't like $69 million overnight kind of money. Overnight, you became the third most expensive living artist behind Jeff Koons and David Hockney. I mean, take me to that moment. Like what goes through your head? I mean, I've spent a little time with you, and you don't like take yourself too seriously sometimes. So.
Wow, that's
no. I see that, and so you have this overnight experience.
Hurtful.
It's not hurtful. It's just honest. How does that feel? Like, what went through your head at the time?
It was just very.
None of us are gonna have that experience, so be honest with us.
I just was like, what in the fuck is going on? It was just. The whole thing, the whole last year has been what the fuck is going on. It's just been a lot to process because it's something that I kind of didn't, I didn't see this coming with like NFTs and stuff. Like and only before that sale had become aware of NFTs about 5 months before that. Right. And it's like I really knew nothing about like crypto, nothing about like the blockchain. So it was a lot, like all at once. And then sort of since then, after the sale, kind of, so the crypto world, that was all new to me. And then kind of after the sale, sort of the like traditional art world, right. That was a whole other world that was like, again, completely sort of like new to me, that has very different rules from the crypto world, but also very different rules from, this sort of digital art freelance kind of design world that I was in before. So it's been a lot of learning, but everybody I've met has just been so helpful and sort of, patient with me, sort of learning the ropes of these new worlds. So it's just been, something that I feel super fortunate to be in this position.
And you still post every day? Right?
Yep, I got to do mine today. Any ideas?
I did create art with him once, but he told me he was so ashamed of it, he barely wanted to post it. So I have no ideas for you. But I will say, you did post one I think it was like last night, called A Year Later.
Yeah.
Can you describe it and talk about the meaning behind it?
It was a kind of like a picture of me with like a giant like blast of light in my face, like exploding in my face, which is kind of what the last year has felt like. This just beam of energy, yeah.
And what did this sale, when this happened, and we can fast forward to this year, but at the time, you could argue that this really helped people understand, or at least make more mainstream the concept of digital ownership when every day is sold. What do you think that the sale of your work did for the art world, even for the broader landscape of Web3?
I think it did sort of, it was, I mean, to be quite honest, a big enough number that caught everybody's attention, and it was like, wait, what the fuck is this? And I think it sort of was a kind of singular moment because it also happened in the context of Christie's, which is a 250-year-old institution known for selling Picassos and Van Goghs and that. And then it's like, what the hell is this? They're selling a computer file that has no physical sort of representation. And so I think it was sort of a kind of singular moment that, again, I feel like I sort of kind of in a way got lucky and sort of really kind of got caught in, especially with the fact that I was working on this project obviously well before the blockchain even existed, and it just so happened that this sort of, in retrospect, kind of fit very well with this new technology that, again, I had only learned of months sort of earlier.
What do you think it was that made it so valuable?
I think there was a connection, and I talked to the collector, Medikov, and I've talked to him and met him a couple times. And he's such a great guy. I actually just talked to him yesterday on the anniversary, and he's doing great, and he had just got married, and he's very seems like he's in a great place. And he's working on a ton of projects too. But I think one of the things that connected with him and why he was I'm going for that thing, is that when I started the Everydays, May 1st, 2007, he was doing programs in India, in a very small poor town in India, and he was working off a thumb drive that he had to borrow his friend's computer and sort of, write the code, and that's all he had. He did not have a computer, he had a thumb drive. And so in the scope of me, completing this picture of the first 5,000 days, he amassed a couple bucks, and and so I think it really he sort of saw himself in that journey over the last 13 years, and that's what really connected with him. And when he kind of explained all this to me after he came out once.
We spoke to Medikov, and we interviewed you last year, right after all this, and it was striking to me how much he saw his story and your story. He had barely been able to afford a computer. He discovered crypto. It changed his life, and so he saw your art as this parallel to his world, which was really interesting.
And I think it's interesting too because he's not remotely your typical art patron.
Right.
And I think that's something that was also kind of lost in this story, that this was a poor kid from India who in the last decade amassed enough money to buy the third most expensive whatever. And that's insane. And that's not, now that I sort of have a better sense of the traditional art market and the patrons at the high end, that is absolutely fucking insane that that happened. And
well,
I think that's something
to a degree,
that
you guys were both outsiders to a degree.
Yeah.
You were an outsider in the fine art world. When your initial work was auctioned off, you were told by a specialist at Christie's that this was going to piss people off. It was going to make people really angry. Even, and we can get into it, your gallery, you just opened an in-person gallery, which we'll get into later, but a lot of the artists some of the artists who were represented by the owner of this art gallery quit in protest. You're a bit of an outsider as well.
Yeah, which is funny because I didn't really feel like that, to be honest. I always thought I was part of the art world, and I didn't realize really that there were kind of two very separate sort of worlds there, and that I was not a part of it. And so I don't know. And it was very surprising to me that people would say the art that I've created, you know, like the everydays, like it wasn't just that it was bad art. It was like that it's not art. And so it's just like, well, what the hell is it then? Like, I don't understand what it possibly could be if I sat down and made a picture every day for the last whatever. What the fuck is it if it's not art? And so it was definitely surprising to me that there was like people who were like so pissed about this. But I think they also were getting like so worked up that it's like, you know, people calling Christie's and being like, are you going to still sell paintings? Like, what's going on? It's just like, Jesus Christ, guys, fucking chill out. Like, this isn't the fucking end of the world because some people are buying some monkey pictures. Like, things are going to fucking, you know, move on here. And, like, this didn't upend everything.
Right. But in all fairness, it did change. It did usher in, it felt like a new era into art, and not just art. And we can get into the broader picture. You talk about NFTs allowing people to have ownership over their digital selves. I think we've probably heard a little bit about this at this point with Web3. Why does true ownership in the digital world matter?
Well, I think it's a concept that's very sort of like new, and I get why people are it's going to take them a sec to sort of like come around to this, because it is such a different paradigm shift from the way we've traditionally thought of files and digital things. Is everything's a copy of a copy. There's no original one. There's no one. It's just, so that is really kind of, it's quite different from how we've thought about computers for the last like 20 years. But I think it's, or, you know, 50 years or whatever. And so I think it's going to take people a while to sort of, you know, fully kind of appreciate what that means. This sort of like sense of like virtual ownership and owning something and being able to sort of like say, this is mine, and no, this is yours. And I think you're going to see much more sort of like, you know, use cases and sort of like segmentation of the market, and people sort of understanding this is nothing but sort of a blank slate, again, very similar to a web page, and that it can do so many different things. And I think it's something that it's hard for me to imagine, because at its core, it's actually such a simple idea, just being able to sort of prove you own something that doesn't exist, that it can be applied to so many different things, that I think we're, you know, obviously just very much at the surface of this, but I think once people understand it, it's going to be second nature to them, and it won't be this like big like hurdle or whatever. And I think we forget about times in the past where we did make these leaps, where it was like email, which we're gonna like check this thing every day. What the fuck is that? I'm not fucking doing, you know what I mean? Like, these things didn't just come like from out of nowhere. They took sort of like social norms to kind of like, you know, propagate and sort of you know, come to be something that everybody agrees is a way we're going to sort of communicate or sort of, you know, interact. And
talking specifically about your art, what would you call your style?
Just the way you said that, I feel.
No, wait, that wasn't a leading
did
question.
Did anybody else feel like there was a tone?
Oh, it's not a tone.
There's a tone.
You're on this
where
side,
it's
I'm on
just
this
kind of,
side.
and
There
it's
was no
meant
tone.
to be hurtful.
It was not. You guys, that was not meant to be hurtful. That was meant to be inquisitive.
I'm kidding. I don't know. What would I call it? Weird? Really? Gross? I don't know. It's definitely, I mean, it's taken sort of different kind of aesthetics over the years. Right now, it's kind of has like this sort of political sci-fi, sort of dystopian, humorous pop sort of influence. But that's really just kind of the last probably like 2-3 years, kind of sort of during the Trump era. It got a little wacky. But a lot of the stuff before that was very like kind of like abstract and more about sort of form and composition and color and like, you know, didn't really have any sort of like narrative elements like the stuff now.
I mean, your stuff increasingly does. I mean, I've always been interested in technology, right? So you have a very specific view, it feels like, on technology. Some of your recent examples are Putin's face drowning in blood, worms with Kanye's head coming out of a soup can. So just really interesting statements.
I mean, the Putin covered in blood, I think
Yeah.
that's a pretty clear statement.
Sure.
Some of them, though, to be honest, like Kanye coming out of the like worm can, like I'm kind of like, I don't even know what that is. Like, and that's what I do want people to like. I'm always trying to make pictures that sort of ask more questions than give kind of direct answers. Because to me, that's just not as interesting, and it's just not going to sort of like last as long.
What
if
do you
you're
mean by
not,
that?
well, it's just I don't want if it's too obvious what the picture means. To me, it's not that interesting. I would much rather have it be more ambiguous and be something that, you know, has multiple sort of like layers of meaning that you could sort of take from it, and that different people can take different meaning from it, and it kind of like spurs a conversation. I think that is, to me, the sort of most interesting kind of like type of art.
I'm definitely going to ask a lot of these questions at the end, but I will pull some of them. So please, guys, ask questions on Slido. But so I think someone just asked, how long does it take to create one picture?
Yeah, so most, and it kind of varies depending on the day, and sort of how much time I have and what's going on. I would say on average it's about like 2 hours though. And it's usually done at the end of the day, but it's got to be done by midnight, and it's got to be like posted by midnight. And so that's a pretty sort of like hard rule that, and usually I'll kind of go right up to like midnight.
And talk a little bit about your process. I know that you have multiple televisions up. Like, can you talk us through, you know, the ideas and actually the process of creating?
Yeah, so in my room I have 2 TVs, and then at the office that we have now I have 6 TVs, all like kind of in like a grid in my office, and they're all on mute, and they all have a different news channel on, which in the last couple weeks has been like just this wall of just honestly like, you know, not good stuff. And so but it's something that it's sort of like, and I think a lot of people are like, oh, that's kind of like overwhelming, but it's sort of like, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's no different than the window to the immediate outside world. I view that as a window to the, you know, sort of like broader outside world. And to me, it's something that I find interesting, and I find sort of like inspiring right now in my work to sort of process and kind of comment on these things that are happening. And I think that's what's also different about this moment, is that I'm able to create these images so quickly because of how advanced these tools are, that I can make these sort of like paintings of these things that otherwise would take, you know, hour or sort of days to paint with that sort of like level of detail. I'm able to make in, you know, an hour, 2 hours. And that's not really something that we've ever kind of had in sort of art, you know, prior to this. There was no way to create images like this that sort of like quickly.
It was interesting because when I saw you about a year ago, it was, and you might not remember it because I feel like it's a big whirlwind from in the last year, but there was something really special and interesting about walking into your home probably like a week after you had just sold a piece of art for $69 million. And, you know, even your computer and your setup, I think you had computers in the bathroom or something to keep them cool.
Yeah, there's some
Right.
computers in the bathroom.
Are
Well,
they
I feel
still
like
there now, or do you have a bigger space, or are you still doing that?
Are we still doing that?
It was really interesting. It was really interesting. But don't you have like a 50,000 square foot place now? Like, I'm sure it's different. Have things changed a lot?
When you say that it's computers in the bathroom, it makes me sound like I'm the fucking Unabomber or some shit.
Okay, well, I mean,
It's
it
like,
did. I think
God,
we
these
actually.
computers in the bathroom.
Well, it takes a lot of power to do what you were actually doing, like the actual art.
So the reason the computers are actually still in the bathroom in my new house too. The reason is actually not is kind of it's.
No one said it was that. Just for the record, no one heard me say that.
No, the reason is just that the computers create a lot of heat.
Right.
And so the way that they sort of process these images is through the graphics cards, which sort of, you kind of set up a sort of simulation of sort of like a scene with sort of 3D models and lights and all that, and then you kind of render it, and it takes it takes hours. And like for movies that are made like VFX, blockbusters or whatever, those could take 30 or 40 hours for one frame, and it's 30 frames a second. So it takes a huge amount of sort of like computing power, and they just kick out a ton of heat. So it's like, well, I'll just put them in the bathroom and then just run a cord to my office, then I don't have to have these noisy, loud computers in it. But yeah.
Right. And talk about what's changed now, because now you have this huge space where you're creating, you have a whole team. Has it changed your process at all?
Yeah, 100%. Like my process is definitely very different, and I think that's one of the things that's sort of ironic in a way, that as the sort of art world was learning of this whole other kind of digital thing and sort of has taken a lot of steps to move more digital, this kind of thing actually sort of prompted me to move in the other direction and thinking about how we could sort of take artwork that is very digital and bring it into the like physical world. And so that's something that, I never really thought about. Like that was never a thought of mine at all. It was always just, what can I do on the computer? No sort of consideration of kind of how that could be represented physically. But to me, that's been very exciting and it feels like this whole other sort of like world of like, whoa, I could use these metals and do this thing and like all this shit that was just no part of my sort of like process before. So that's been super fun and inspiring. And yeah, we do have in Charleston now we've got like a 50,000 square foot sort of like space, and we're building out this kind of like gallery space that's just going to be more of like, not to like sell things or sort of like show work. It's more just a place where I can like make something and just immediately sort of like have it be shown. Because that's the thing that's very different with sort of the traditional art world. Everything moves at, in some ways, a much slower pace. So it's like, oh, okay, you want to show your stuff in a museum, that's going to be like 8 months from now or 2 years from now or whatever. Versus I'm so used to like, I make something, I immediately put it up, and it's like out for everybody. And so I wanted to have a physical space that would be like that, where I could make something and immediately show it sort of in that kind of like context.
Yeah, you just opened your first in-person art gallery, which I thought was really interesting. It seems like the antithesis of like a digital artist, but it seemed kind of, you talk about the evolution of your art, like an evolution of your art, but also an evolution of the traditional concept of what we know about the NFT drop or the NFT in your art. So can you explain why you decided to really go to an in-person gallery and what the art actually looks like, and then also what the role of the NFT is there?
Yeah, so the show that I had, and it's actually up still running in New York at Jack Hanley Gallery, opened a couple weeks ago. I wanted to do something that was in person and was more sort of, I guess, playing by the kind of like traditional rules in terms of like having a gallery show and having stuff on the walls and stuff like that, to kind of show people from the traditional art world that digital art is kind of just another medium that has the same sort of like messages and sort of like craft and sort of like emotion attached to it than any other sort of like medium, painting, sculpture, photography has, and sort of like meet them halfway, or sort of like kind of do something that's more in the vein of something they've seen before in a way, so they could kind of focus more on the image and sort of the message behind it, and see that that's just like any other sort of like piece of artwork. That's the connection that people have to these things. And that's what gives anything value, is that emotional connection. So it was kind of like more of like a almost, standard show, but the pieces did have NFTs, but they were more sort of like just a standard kind of like certificate of authenticity. The sort of like, in my opinion, I guess, real value of the work lies in the sort of like physical sort of metal prints and paintings and pastel drawings. And I think, to me, that sort of playing with these different mediums, I think, is exciting, because it sort of, I think, speaks to one of the things that makes digital art interesting is it's almost, because it doesn't have an inherent physical form, it almost can take any physical form and like have sort of different meaning attached to these things. But the actual thing itself is almost like an idea, because it doesn't actually like sort of like exist in a way. And so just sort of like playing with some of those kind of like concepts and ideas, you know, to me is a way to sort of bridge these two worlds between the sort of digital art world and kind of traditional world.
And it's interesting that the NFT was just really kind of a different type of certification for a physical piece of art that is different than what we've been talking about. Is that where you think things are going?
I think that's what, yeah, in the future, I think, and that's where I think you are going to see, you know, sort of less of a focus on, again, the sort of technology and what does the technology do. And that's where I think you will see in the future, I personally think, you'll see NFTs with like all paintings. And again, it won't be like, I got this NFT. It's like, well, you got a painting. And instead of them handing you just a piece of paper that they've typed some information and like this certifies that it's whatever, it's on the blockchain, and it's sort of like you're not going to lose it, and it can have the provenance of the artwork right in the metadata of the NFT itself. So you can immediately see this is who owned it, and that thing is sort of just a better sort of like certificate of authenticity, because at the end of the day, none of this NFT shit is going to fucking last if it's not better than what came before. It can't just be it's an NFT for the fucking sake of having an NFT.
Which, in all fairness, we're seeing a lot of NFTs.
We're seeing a lot of
having NFTs. I mean, in the time that your piece of art came out, it's pretty frothy right now. There's a lot of projects out there that you could argue, I think they say are like rug pulls, but just aren't projects that might have lasting impact. So what do you think we can do better to, if you say this is as big as email, if NFTs could be as big as email, what's the way to get it there? What's the way to kind of get through the noise?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of sort of honestly room for improvement across sort of a wide spectrum of sort of aspects of NFTs. I think right now the marketplaces are still very sort of, you know, immature and sort of new, and they're just starting to sort of roll out kind of protections and sort of improve the UI to make these things kind of like easier to use and easier to understand. I think with wallets are still sort of like very complicated for most people. So I think there's a massive sort of room for improving infrastructure around those. And I think it's just going to take time, and I think it's going to take education. And I think you're going to see people enter the market in different ways, because there will be some use case that suddenly applies to them, and it's like, well, now I do need to learn about NFTs because it came with this thing, or I'm interested in this thing, and that's how you interact with the festival or something.
Right.
And so I don't think there's necessarily one sort of like kind of path forward. I think there's going to be so many people attacking this from different ways, which I think is one of the things that does make it sort of so inspiring, is because you have all of these people sort of working so hard on all these things, and you can kind of see what they're doing and sort of take little pieces from this project or this idea or this DAO or whatever.
I mean, when we talk about the evolution of blockchain in the physical world, can you give me some specific example besides art of where you think this is going to play out?
I think it's going to play out in like a bunch of different like assets. I think it will, and I think it will, you know, could potentially play out at scale on, you know, a lot of sort of inventory systems or things like that. So I think it will. I think as a sort of just computer science technology, it's sort of that, again, core idea is so sort of like versatile and so sort of like basic that I think, you know, it's going to be applied to a huge amount of things. Anything that we want to like track, I think, which is a lot of different things. I think I could see it sort of providing some real sort of like utility and value with it. So
the topic of your in-person show was uncertain future. And I walked in, it's in New York, if you guys are in New York. I walked in and there was a gigantic,
I'm so sorry.
No, it's interesting.
So sorry.
There is a gigantic
I've
picture.
ruined South by Southwest.
No. There was a gigantic picture of Mark Zuckerberg with brains coming out of his head, and then actually directly when you walk in, just to give you guys a visual, like it's in Tribeca in downtown New York, and you walk in, and there's just a gigantic image of Jeff Bezos. It's called Toxic Masculinity, and he has phallic images coming out of his head. Is that? Would that be? I'm characterizing it correctly. And so walk me through, clearly you have a certain point of view on technology.
I feel like phallic images is definitely, you really kind of classed it up.
Well,
He's got a bunch of dicks on his head. Got a bunch of dicks coming out of his head.
and so to that point, walk me through your point of view on our complicated relationship with technology.
No, I think it's I don't know. There's a lot of sort of like messages in there, I think. And I think we have a very complex relationship with technology that I think we're starting to appreciate, but I don't think we're remotely close to there, and I don't think we're really being honest with ourselves sometimes about how dependent we are on these devices. And if you lost your phone right now, how that would be like, oh fuck, I have to get this back. That has now become like the number one priority in my life, getting my fucking phone back. Like, and
Have you ever lost your phone?
yeah, and it was the number one fucking priority in my life to get it in a fucking new phone, because it was like, what the hell?
Seeing the art that
Very
you do, I don't even
disruptive.
know if I'd want to discover your phone.
What's it again? Really?
Really
This
interesting.
is very disparaging. It's something that I think, again, is going to only become increasingly relevant as sort of technology continues to kind of intersect with a bunch of different sort of like aspects of kind of like human life, from again food and sort of medicine, and we're seeing it across the board that it's sort of like it's disrupting these industries. And so I think this is going to be a topic that to me is very interesting, because these companies and these things are not all bad. They have a bunch of sort of positives to them, but there are very real negatives. And I think having a sort of like, dialogue about that is something that we should be doing more often.
What do you think that the traditional art world can learn about from the fundamental values of the NFT space?
That is an interesting question. What can the traditional art world learn from NFTs? I think to me it just it kind of pushes the sort of like boundary of what art is. It just expands it a little bit. And I think this isn't something that, to be honest, is sort of like new. This is something that has happened with other sort of medium in the past. Photography was not art for, 80 years, 90 years, whatever. And then all of a sudden it was part of art. And I think that's really all sort of you're seeing with NFTs and sort of digital art. It's something that was obviously part of our sort of culture and visual language of movies and TVs and websites and commercials and blah, blah, all this stuff. All has digital art, all has sort of, is something that is part of the world, but it just wasn't looked at under the context of sort of traditional art or sort of fine art. And so I think that's really kind of what this moment is about, is sort of just, again, sort of widening people's perception of what can be art.
Do you think we're entering a new era of the web?
That's a good question, and I think it's so tough because there's so much just hype, sort of buzzword bullshit around sort of the metaverse and Web3, and these things have become, marketing sort of ploys that so much that I think it's, I think we are at a moment where it feels like things are going to be different moving forward on the internet, and I think people are sort of recognizing that there is a difference between, sort of Facebook and Google and sort of the, Twitter sort of Web3 companies and these other things that are emerging. But it's still so early. I don't fully sort of like know what that's going to like look like and how that's going to like play out, in the next, say, 3 or 4 years.
What do you think is the promise of this in this new, in the NFT landscape? What is the peril?
I think the promise of it is that people are going to have more ownership over their sort of virtual self. And I think the promises of it is that instead of uploading all of your personal information to Facebook and Google and all of these sites, that then just take it and sort of sell ads against it, show you ads against it, that you would have more of a sort of like true ownership of your sort of information. And that they might use it still, but that you could just pack it all up into an NFT and take it to another site, or sort of like that there would be more maybe competitiveness and less of a sort of super centralized sort of place like Facebook, where, let's be honest, there's 2 or 3 of these sort of like platforms where all of the conversations are taking place. Right. And so, and they have rules that they could just literally change tomorrow. And I think that's another thing that we've kind of sort of overlooked, is the insane amount of sort of unilateral power that these tech leaders have. I look at, when Jack Dorsey kicked Trump off of Twitter, that was like a massively blow to him, that Jack didn't have to sort of, lobby Congress or go to the UN and blah, blah, blah. He just like, fuck you, dude, you're done. And then he was fucking done. And then we couldn't fucking hear from him.
Well, he technically violated some of Twitter.
No, I'm not saying he shouldn't have been kicked off. He absolutely fucking should have been kicked off.
Okay,
in my opinion. Okay, let's make that super fucking clear. No, he definitely should have fucking been kicked off. But honestly, I think sooner. But he got it done or whatever.
Right.
And so let me be super clear on that. But I think it's one of those things where, again, you have a private citizen who runs this tech company, and he made a choice that really affects the like global power structure, like, again, sort of completely unilaterally. And I think that's very interesting, but also something we should take note of.
I remember interviewing Matthew Prince, who runs Cloudflare, and he had kicked off the Daily Storm, this Nazi site, and he made it public. He said, "I did this, and I shouldn't have had the power to do this." And it was kind of
should not have.
Yeah. But he said, "I do have this power." It was kind of this statement, and I think we're understanding now the power. This is when we talk about Web 2 and how much power these companies have, and so that's where you talk about the peril. I worry about having started my career covering technology in 2009, even sitting on these same stages at South by Southwest, when we talk about a utopian version of the future, where I've sat across from so many entrepreneurs saying they're going to change the world. And I've always been an optimist too, right? I'm not just like super curmudgeonly. But you have, and then you had so many complicated things happen over the last decade of tech. And I would argue it's because you had the same type of, many things I would argue, but you had the same type of people building with not enough diversity around them. And so I look at Web3 in the NFT space, and it's a male-driven space. I can imagine a lot of the people who love your art are, a lot of your fans are a certain demographic. I mean, this utopia will not turn out to be utopia, I think, if we continue going in this one direction. You obviously are a big name now in the space. How do you think we can do a better job of getting different types of people in? And not just like the lip service of saying we need to do it. Like, what actually needs to happen?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that is very much sort of a carryover from the Web 2 space, that it's the same sort of like people. And I mean, it's definitely something that I think is going to take conscious sort of like effort to change. Just last night, that Unicorn DAO is a sort of women-led DAO that is seeking to sort of really kind of empower people who it's so easy to sort of like get lost in the voice and have their voices get kind of lost in the just massive sort of noise, because partly just numerically there's just less people sort of like doing it, and that it is mostly just white dudes fucking doing this shit, if we're being honest. And so I completely agree that it's sort of having a diversity of voices at the table is something that is going to make it so that this isn't sort of a future and a sort of system that is set up, again, for sort of one type of person, and that really sort of like appeals to and sort of takes into consideration all of these different sort of like voices.
Will you be investing in some of those projects?
Yeah,
given
I'm
that you've-
invested in that Unicorn
Right.
DAO and like founding member, and I think it's something that you know, to me is exciting to see this, and like going to the event and like meeting the people and sort of seeing the artwork that is very different from the artwork that, you know, sort of I do, and to me, like, that's one of the most exciting parts about it is the artwork aspect of this, is getting to see people come at sort of art from a very different view, and you can see it in the artwork, and that's to me what's exciting, and it's something where it's like, wow, I've never sort of like seen something like that, and yeah, it was just something that I think is I think you're gonna see more of that though, because I think people maybe don't give enough credit to the NFT space for the social justice sort of kind of mindset that there is there. And I really see in a lot of sort of people, I saw so many people sort of spring into action with Ukraine and start DAOs and start raising money and stuff. And you've seen this with a handful of sort of like projects of people sort of coming together to do something that's good. So I think that's something that to me is really encouraging, and that, you know, I would love to see more of. But I do think you are also, unfortunately, going to see the opposite, and I think you are going to see people start DAOs where it's like, I don't really love that DAO.
I mean, what happens when
really love
QAnon
that
gets
DAO.
a DAO, right? I think we sometimes create these utopian versions of the future without thinking, oh, 4chan
Could have a
read
DAO.
some really interesting things. Well,
4chan
now
could have a
imagine
DAO
if
and they
they're
could pool their
digitally
money.
weaponized with a balance sheet, right?
Yep, there you go. And so it's sort of like, that's a very real possibility, and I would, in my estimation, would say it's inevitable. And so again, the knife cuts both ways, just like it did with Web 2. In the beginning, you know, we had the Arab Spring, and we had Obama gets elected. No, everything about Web 2 is fucking great. And then it's sort of like, well, maybe not everything. And so I think you're going to see that, unfortunately, with Web 3 as well.
Right. Although we do at least have a blueprint of the last decade of what we can take away from.
Yeah, 100%. I think that is a good point. And I think, again, it's so easy to focus on the negatives because it's so early, and there are a lot of, like, you know, shitty pump and dump and rug pulls and sort of like people doing things where it's like, is it going to be legal in 18 months? I don't know about that. That seems like a security. And so there's a number of things where, you know, it needs to become sort of like more professionalized, more inclusive, and I think people just need to sort of like be patient and focus on sort of creating solutions to this stuff versus, you know, kind of trying to rip it down.
When I saw you, it was in Charleston where you live. When I was there, you showed me, we were in like this undisclosed small studio. We weren't allowed to show where we were.
Very Unabomber-ish.
Yeah, no, we didn't want to say where we were because you had newly made a lot of money, right? Like we had to be kind of careful.
That's fair.
I'm just trying to give color to people, you know? I think that's interesting. And you showed me one of your favorite everydays, and it was a naked Buzz Lightyear sitting on a Jeff Koons balloon dog, like a statue. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
I do.
But the message, I asked you about the message there, and there was a really interesting message, I thought. Do you remember?
I don't remember what I said.
I remember what you said. It was you, a play off of you kind of trying to fit in the fine art world, right?
Yeah.
To some degree, which I thought was interesting then as you were kind of grappling with this moment in your life.
Yeah, and I think that's been something that honestly has, you know, that was almost a year ago, honestly has been something that I've been surprised by, is how accepting and how much sort of progress has happened in the last year in terms of sort of adoption of this. It's crazy to think that just 1 year ago, this interview would have been like, what's an NFT? And
Right.
it would have been like, you know, a year ago, I was doing, especially right after the sale, just interview after interview after interview, and every single one, half of the interview was literally just trying to explain what is an NFT. And so we've kind of, you know, more or less moved on from like what it is and sort of like are starting to have more nuanced topics or nuanced conversations about it. So I think it is moving, you know, quite quickly, and sort of the traditional art world is part of that in terms of sort of really kind of being very curious about this stuff and taking the time to learn it, and it's happened a lot faster than I thought it would.
A year later, do you feel like you fit?
I don't know if I would say fit. Kind of, in some sense. I think people are starting to see this as a piece of the conversation, I will say. That people, and there's still a ways to go, for sure. But people, I think, are starting to see that this art form has the same sort of elements of other mediums that, again, were once not considered art, but now we think, of course. And NFTs really, in my mind, just very much fall into that same sort of category, NFTs and digital art.
I want to ask audience questions because we have about 15 minutes. You make fun of it, Beeple crap, but doesn't it actually hurt to be a millionaire and at the same time not seen as a real artist for many? They asked it, I didn't, so.
I don't actually understand.
Guys, keep going.
Fun of it, Beeple crap, but
like you, as in like your name. Oh, looks like that one disappeared. I'll translate it. So I think what they're saying is like, you make like your name's Beeple. It's like on Instagram. It's like Beeple crap. Like you kind of make fun of it. But does it feel a certain way? Do you feel like you're not taken seriously as an artist? Was that correct? Whoever asked that question?
Well,
Nod? Okay.
Makes sense. It is odd that that I'm now in this position where I am sort of connecting and sort of trying to educate all of these very serious museum curators and directors and, gallerists and blah, 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 but I'm also putting a bunch of dicks on Jeff Bezos' head. But somehow, and people are just, oh yeah, that's very interesting. That's very it's very, it's not, yeah.
Someone characterized your art as kind of like you troll a little bit.
See, I don't think that. And when I saw somebody say that it's that I troll people, and I really don't feel like that at all. Because I feel like when somebody's trolling something, they're doing it to fuck with people.
Right.
And they're kind of doing it, in my mind, it's not super malicious, but there is kind of a little bit of a malicious intent. Right. And they're trying to offend people. And to be quite honest, as much as I understand a giant, 8-foot print of Jeff Bezos with dicks all over his head could be very offensive to a wide range of people, including Mr. Jeff Bezos himself. Mm-hmm. But it's not something where I was creating it with the express sort of intent to offend people. Oh man, people are going to be really pissed off by this, or I'm never trying to sort of offend people with this work. I'm really always hoping that they get, it makes them laugh, it makes them smile, it makes their day, a tiny bit better. That's it. And so I don't think that's the same thing with the troll, that they're trying to fuck with people a little bit more.
One question that's been up here for a while that I think so many of the entrepreneurs I've interviewed and so many of the most successful people I've interviewed deal with this. But the question is, do you deal with imposter syndrome?
Yeah, it's definitely, I think that's part of the sort of Beeple crap moniker, I guess, because I look at so many other sort of artists out there that are just so amazing, and it's so easy to just flip through Instagram and you're just oof, ugh, I suck, because there's just so much, insanely good work that I think it is easy to get sort of sucked into that. And that's where I think people need to sort of, if they're kind of seeing that, feeling that more, I don't think it ever goes away, but I think if they're feeling that more, maybe that's where you dial back the social media bit, because I think it is something that agitates that and sort of makes it worse.
Do you sometimes take a break? Because you post something every day. Have you actually, for mental health reasons, been able to do you step away at all? I mean, you're watching silent television all the time. You're creating these images. Do you ever take a step back?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, kind of. There's times where it's sort of if I'm on vacation or something, we'll make a conscious sort of efforts to put our phones down and be okay, we're just I'm not going to check the news. I'm not going to check any social media or whatever. I will say I do not do it as much as I should, because I think it is, again, something where it's just so easy to get sucked in to this stuff, and especially now with that damn TikTok. It's just very easy where you're just like, okay, well, there's an hour just sucked into just mindless bullshit. Yeah.
How does it feel to be a billionaire artist? Are you a billionaire?
I'm definitely not a billionaire.
Yeah, we got to fact check that. How does it feel?
Okay, well, what about a trillionaire? I mean, like,
Yeah.
if we're just
You
picking
got to
numbers.
keep selling. How does it feel? I'm just going to change it to a multi-millionaire artist. What did it change? What did change in your life and work?
It definitely, again, sort of like changed very much the focus of my work, because before, you know, with sort of the work that I was doing, it was just me at the computer, and it didn't require any money beyond that, to be quite honest. Now with the physical work that I'm doing, that's where the whole sort of billionaire thing comes in. And it's something that these things do require more money, because it's somebody's, you know, engineering this. It's made out of real parts, and it's like, okay, well, this thing costs, you know, $500,000 to make or whatever. And so that was just not something I just could not do before, like financially or whatever. And so that's the thing that to me has been very exciting about this, not having the money to, you know, piss away on cars or dumb shit like that, but like having it to be able to do these art projects that just I couldn't do before. Now I can actually do.
Do you, now that people follow your work so religiously, and you had a following before, so like let's be honest about that, but now that people follow your work so religiously, do you feel pressure? I mean, I read something that Paul Simon said about how he never worries about running out of good ideas, which I thought was very admirable. Do you ever worry about running out of ideas? Do you put more pressure on yourself now that you're a more well-known name?
No, I think maybe a little bit more pressure, but not that much. Because again, I sort of am looking at this very long term. And so, and I I did kind of all at some point expect there to be more attention to the everydays. I actually thought it was going to be when I hit 20 years that there would be some more like, wait, what the fuck was this kid doing? So it happened a little sooner than I thought, but it was definitely something that kind of has been very sort of like slow, minus the last year. That was definitely a fucking rocket ride. But sort of slow kind of like progression and people sort of like noticing the work. So I think that's kind of helped sort of prepare me a bit for sort of this last year.
Another question, how do you feel about the environmental impact NFTs have made and will make in the future?
Yeah, I think that's something that very much still, it kind of dropped off the radar. It was very much when they came out, something that I think was at the forefront of people's minds, and it's already maybe dropped off a little bit more than it should in terms of kind of like, well, we still got to kind of fix this. And you've seen people put out, you know, sometimes massive editions of this stuff. And I think it is something that absolutely still needs to be fixed. But I think it is something that, to be quite honest, I'm confident will be fixed, because there isn't an entrenched sort of, you know, group lobbying to not have it be fixed. And so I think when this gets better and sort of moves to proof of stake, I think you will see, you know, obviously massive sort of improvement immediately. And I think it's something that just kind of like needs to happen. When it's going to happen, again, whether it's 2 years or, you know, 1 year, 6 months or whatever, I think it's, again, sort of taking a longer sort of look at these things. I think it's something that will happen. But again, it needs to be addressed.
Does anything specific need to happen for it?
I think it just, you know, I think the thing that would, you know, make a massive difference and would sort of almost make it a moot point is if Ethereum sort of moved to proof of stake and the transactions were suddenly a fraction of the sort of energy usage that they have now. And again, I don't want to sort of overstate my sort of technical knowledge of this stuff, to be quite honest, but it's something that I think very much, you know, will happen in the next future. And that will make a big difference right away.
I wish I could see the names. I think I might need glasses because I would say the person who's asking these questions. Do you still identify yourself as a graphic designer, or has your self-appointed title changed or shifted?
That's a good question. I do not consider myself a graphic designer anymore. And the way I was making that distinction is very objective and sort of like cut and dry. And in terms of the way I was making money before is someone would come to me and they would say, here's this problem. Can you solve it with graphic design skills? And we'll pay you this money. And it's very sort of like straightforward. And that's how I made, money, a living. Versus now, let me preface that, while I was doing that, I was also on the side creating my own sort of art that was just self-directed, but it wasn't to be collected. There was no way to sort of like collect it, but I was just making it purely because I loved making it, and like that was the thing I sort of like needed to do, or was the most sort of like, kind of like fun thing to do. But at that time it was called personal work because again, it was not sort of for a client. Now, like I just make whatever I want and then hope somebody buys it. And to me, that's more of kind of like what an artist, I guess, is. That you're sort of just making something and then I hope you can buy it. And again, that's where the term starving artist comes in, is because that is very hard. And I do feel very, very fortunate to be in like a position like this. And I think luck is definitely a part of that, just because, again, there's a lot of sort of people out there and a lot of amazing artists out there, but there's just not enough sort of, I guess, demand because so many people kind of want to do this job to sort of be able to kind of make it so that it's an easy job to sort of like make a living with.
And I think there was this moment after your sale that it was like, oh, okay, if you do digital art, now there's ways to monetize it, but just because you do digital art and now there's this new way to monetize it with NFTs does not mean immediately you're going to turn into Beeple or this or that. I mean, there's a lot of real murky in between.
Well, it's very, and that's what I think people will kind of eventually come to sort of recognize is, just because you go buy a canvas and you go buy paints, is somebody just magically going to go buy your painting? No. It's sort of like if you have grown a sort of like community and an audience, then you will have somebody to buy that painting, but otherwise you will have a very hard time selling that painting. And that's really all NFTs are. It's sort of like once all the hype sort of dies down and it's sort of, why would I buy this JPEG? It's going to sort of go back to the kind of metrics that you see in, or sort of indicators you see in the sort of the traditional art market of what gives things value in terms of someone's kind of reputation and the sort of their impact on the sort of art world and things that are a bit more quantifiable than kind of what you're seeing now.
Someone wants to know what the first thing you bought to celebrate after closing that sale was.
The first thing I bought, trying to think. Well, we did the next day take a private jet down to Miami, which was a big because I'd never even flown first class. Like I'd never flown business class, and so this was like, holy shit, what the fuck is going on? And then like that weekend too, I met Gary Vee down in Miami, and again, it was just like, what the fuck is going on?
What was going on?
I don't know. And there's like, articles in the like freaking front page of the New York Times or Wall Street Journal was, the like artwork and stuff. And it was a crazy couple days.
Is it, this is a strange question because it's like a super 1% question, maybe even like less than 1%. Is it, have you struggled at all to try to accept a lot of the things that have come your way in the last year? I mean, I can imagine you're just in a different realm. You talk about taking a private jet and this and that. I don't think anyone feels, no, I'm saying no one feels bad for you, right? But
That's fair.
Right?
That's fair.
But to that point, I can imagine there's a pretty big difference between, I mean, your life did change overnight. Did you struggle with anything?
It definitely is a lot to process, and I've kind of somewhat resigned to the fact that I don't think I will fully process it ever. It's not going to be like, well, I understand how that happened, like, and all the aspects of it. Like, I think it's something that is, especially as it takes on new context over time, I think it's something that, yeah, is, with having a family and having a, 6 and 8-year-old and them having some sort of recognition and sort of cognition of what's going on is very interesting too, and sort of wanting to kind of explain this to them in a way that's sort of, appropriate for them right now. There are a lot of just sort of like aspects of it that are, it's kind of a lot to process. And then, you throw on sort of this added media attention and people, sort of watching what I'm doing a bit more and sort of having to, not having to, but being lucky enough to sort of be in a position to be a representative of this kind of like space in some ways, is another sort of thing that I needed to sort of like contend with and kind of like process and sort of like work through. But, everybody has been so sort of, again, just encouraging and supportive that it's just felt like such a, insane blessing.
We got to wrap, but I guess my last question was, because I spent time with you and your family during that auction a year ago, it was just interesting to step into that small moment in your life. What is the biggest difference between the people I met then and the one who I'm sitting with today?
I feel like I should come up with some very like just great emotional question, but the only thing I can think is, since then I drew all those dicks on Jeff Bezos' head. That's all I can think of.
I don't know why you're clapping for him for that one. I just, well, I was gonna end on that, but now I feel like I'm gonna do one more. I can't end with phallic images
going
of.
For 4 more hours.
Yeah, they're gonna take me off.
I will get a good.
Why do you make art?
Okay, Jesus Christ, that's the question
Come
you fucking
on!
end on. Let's end on an
you can-
easy question. Let's just give me a freaking softball.
Just because you sold your art for all this money doesn't mean you get softballs for the rest of your.
What is it? What is art?
Why do you make art?
Why do you make art?
And you said you didn't like trolling? What was?
Why do I make art? It's not something that I like honestly feels like a huge conscious decision. It's just something that I've kind of, all of my adult life has kind of been the like prime sort of like focus, and I'm not very well rounded. Like I don't have like a bunch of other sort of interests outside art. It's very much been the sort of driving force in a lot of the sort of ways that I've structured my life just with everydays. That's a time commitment that's every single day.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it just doesn't really feel like something that I need to sort of motivate myself to do, or sort of it just feels like something that I feel so lucky to do and feel so fortunate to be able to kind of like share with people. And then also so insanely lucky that there's a bunch of fucking perverts and weirdos out there that connect with this shit. Like, that again, I feel very fortunate for.
Okay, we can end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.